Welcome back to I Want My MTV, a video series where we'll be replicating the MTV of our childhood on our own server. If you haven't seen the first two parts, make sure to check them out first, as it gives an overall look at the system and how it operates, as well as tips on how to build a large music video library, which is essential. Today is the big one. We're going to put our knowledge of how Ersatz works, the video library we've amassed, and some new techniques together to build our own shows and schedule them to run 24/7. It's good to clarify something at this stage. Ersatz is only using up your system resources when there's actually someone watching the channel, so despite making schedules that run all day and night, these are just programmed guides for the system to reference when you press play. You can have as many channels as you want without worry that your hard disks or CPU will be constantly used. The main channel I'm building currently and using as a template for this series is my 90s one, as it's the one I'm most complete on. But alongside it, I'm building an 80s one, then one's dedicated to rock and also dance videos. If the backbone is set up correctly from the word go, making more extensive networks isn't difficult, but if you think small from the beginning, you might find yourself having to rethink everything further down the line. My folder structure starts with decades. Then within these folders, I have my base shows. We're going to assign these to smart collections just like we did in the first video, so anything added to them will be automatically added to the rotation for that particular show. It doesn't always make sense that a video might only get played in one specific block, however, so we can make some manual collections and multi-collections too that will bring in songs that have a wider appeal. Here we can see the differences between the three collection types. Smart playlists really are our go-tos. They require the least amount of work, so we'll let them do the heavy lifting. Thinking about where a song's base show should be really helps out with this. A rock band might have a breakthrough hit, but also 10 songs released at a similar time that didn't chart so highly. Personally, I'd put that artist into an alternative rock show, and then use a manual collection to bring that big hit into a chart-based show too. Let's use 120 minutes as an example of a show that spans multiple decades, and gives us an excuse to use all three collection types to build the show. Okay, the first entry is pretty straightforward. Everything that's in the 120-minute subfolder within our 80s folder is picked up in the Smart collection and is ready to go. This really doesn't work any different than the basic example we did in episode 1. If we have an 80s channel, we can just feed that directly in to make that show. The 90s is a little more complicated, as we have another, more mainstream alternative music show that aired in the middle of the decade, called Alternative Nation, and maybe we want to bring some of those songs into this show too. That's where the manual collection comes in, and you can just bring songs in on a song-by-song basis, and we'll show some examples later on how to do this. We can then build multi-collections to bind these two together, and again we have our collection ready for the channel. The 2000s version works the same as the 80s. So we have versions of the show that are cater-made for decades channels. They also work nicely as shows within an overall MTV channel that you might want separated like this. You can't add multi-collections into another multi-collection sadly, so we'll just break everything down to the 4 original collections and combine them into one, to make an overall 120-minute show that would fit perfectly on a general MTV channel. Let's consider 3 shows I have that are based on real MTV Europe shows from the time. 2 European popular music call-in shows, Dial MTV and MTV Select, that are only really going to differ based on when the songs came out, as MTV Select replaced Dial MTV in 1996 and also Hit List UK. In my system, Dial MTV and MTV Select are going to have a focus on popular music originating from Europe, Australia and other parts of the world excluding the US and Canada, as they have their own shows like TRL. It'll also include the more popular UK acts of the time, but crucially I've decided to exclude the Britpop bands from these shows, which Hit List UK will contain along with the pop acts. This will give the shows some common shared videos, while keeping their own identity through unique songs that won't appear anywhere else. As you can see, in order to set this up correctly, I have to have 3 separate folders for the Hit List UK songs, so they feed into their corresponding European shows automatically. It's worth sitting down at this stage to work out exactly what you want and how it will work, as realising you need to start splitting things out of folders when you're hundreds if not thousands of songs down really isn't fun. Also, any manual collections you have set up can get damaged if you move files from one folder to another once they're in Ersatz. Here's a good example of how to use manual playlists to make an entire show. I wouldn't do this until you're satisfied your automated shows are set up correctly, so you don't have to move songs around and redo these. Let's build a top 20 show. I have one set up for Europe and one for the US. This is pretty easy to do once you've built up a large music video library. I hope you spent the time since the last episode wisely. Using a few different resources, we can easily find out the most popular singles in the time range we're looking for, and I found going through year-end lists and making collections of the biggest selling 20 to 30 songs of each year gives us a nice library size of 250 or so videos. Perfect for half-hour to hour-long shows that are played a few times a week that's all killer, no filler. We just find these songs existing in our collection already by using Ersat's built-in search feature and add them to a manual collection. Putting words in between quotes helps eliminate false positives, and the system moves pretty quickly even in larger libraries. It's boring manual work, but if you're never moving these files out of their existing folders, you shouldn't have to repeat this process ever again. We're making some real progress. We now have a couple of best of shows compiled and some different genre shows. My shows are based on real life, but the ability to customize them and bend them to fit what I personally want is what makes it great. Naturally, during the actual time period, there would have been a lot of content I wouldn't actually want to sit through. That's no longer an issue. Now we need to work out how many shows to build and where to air them. Wikipedia is a great resource for the shows. Some have a ton of detail, while others are sadly lacking, but there's nothing stopping you from using a show's name and identity and deciding yourself what it now looks like. I looked through TV listings for both MTV US and MTV Europe that I found online from the time period and copied them into a spreadsheet so I could see what an overall week looked like, and then I was able to build my own. This covers my taste of music from the 90s, and I mix having some shows play in the same slot each day, which is pretty realistic as the daily schedules didn't generally change much, and then picking slots to alternate what is so it doesn't become too boring and unpredictable. So the next step is, what can we do to make this feel like a real channel and not just thematically similar videos being played out? We already have the MTV logo present, which looks great, and the tracks are announced with on-screen text. But a few important things are missing to make this feel legit. The first is the show introductions, so we know when the programming has changed, and the other is the iconic MTV logo idents they ran for decades, between songs and commercials. We can find collections of these using the techniques talked about in the last episode, then it's just a case of organising them. I have a separate folder to keep them separate from music videos. Each show gets its own folder, because we might have multiple different intros, and we'll let Ersatz pick one at random each time, and then the MTV idents, I simply separated the 90s ones out of the pack I found. Some of these I see a little too often and bug me, so I can remove them or find more to add as time goes by. Or you can make different collections to air at different times of the day if that suits you. The last thing I'll add is a collection of MTV promo commercials that I'll run in the gap between the last video of one show before the next one starts. It's natural that we can't fill the block exactly with just music videos, and you might have a minute or two left over. I also have a fallback clip for the few seconds that'll be left over again, just so we don't have a blank screen. We add all these things to Ersatz in the same way as the music videos, with the only difference being these are set as other videos. The benefit to this is not seeing the file name on screen like we would do for videos, and the collections work in the same way as our regular ones, and will update if we drop new files into the folders. The show introductions we can leave as they are. We're going to call these up in Ersatz the exact same way as we do the videos, and I'll demonstrate that shortly. The idents, commercials, and fallback have to be set up in a special way, so they appear in our scheduling window. Let's talk briefly about how these differ, so they don't cause confusion. Pre-roll filler is something that plays before our media clip, in this case a single music video. I currently don't use these at the moment, but you might be able to find to incorporate this. Maybe you want both an ident and a commercial between each song. This would be a great way to do it. Personally, I find that's just a bit too much filler. Mid-roll filler is used on media with chapter breaks like TV shows and movies, in order to give a realistic feeling of going to commercials at set points. Music videos don't use chapter breaks, so this won't do anything for us, so I leave it blank. Post-roll filler is just like the pre-roll, except it's what's played after each media clip. I want an MTV ident animation to play at this point. Tail filler is what's played when the block is complete, but there's some time left over before the next block starts, and it's where I'd like the system to fill the time with commercials. Fallback filler is for those really short breaks, where there's just not enough time to schedule anything else, so you can use something like static video to pretend there's a signal loss, or a musical loop, rather than something you'd want to see to completion. You can set this one on the channel itself, but maybe you'll want to use different collections based on the time the show is airing. That's up to you. Here's the filler presets I have set up currently for all my shows. The top one is used for another channel, and the second one contains the MTV idents from multiple decades, so we can ignore those for today. MTV Bumpers 90s contains, unsurprisingly, the idents I know were aired in the 90s. Because we know we want a single animation shown between videos, we set this to count and then set the count to 1. It knows which collection to draw these from, and I personally don't incorporate the MTV watermark at this point, as the real channel itself doesn't use it. Raising the clip count or changing it to a set duration will naturally incorporate more of these, but as this is triggered after every single video, I'd rather just keep it more simple, or we'll end up seeing more idents than music. Be careful not to put any files into this collection that are overlong. MTV Promo 90s once again is self-explanatory. Small commercials advertising MTV shows and other related things rather than product commercials. There's nothing to set here, as the system knows the block has ended and is just filling up space until the next one starts. The fallback filler really doesn't need any settings either, as it's just going to pick a clip and play it, then cut the second something is scheduled, whereas the other fillers are always played in their entirety. Now, to put everything together in the schedule, taking what we learned in the first video and expanding from it. Here's my chart of what I want to happen. At 12 PM I want to show Hitlist UK to start, so we trigger a single random intro from the Hitlist UK folder, then go into a loop of playing music videos with an MTV ident after each one. Then when there's no more time to complete a music video before the next show is scheduled, we go into some commercials, before a short burst of static, before the intro to Dial MTV Europe starts playing at 2 PM. Now we know what type of filler fits where, we have all our clips loaded and organised, we know in our head what we want to happen with the schedule, it's time to build it. So here's the schedule page from my live server that I watch, and we can see there are lots of entries in it. Don't be too overwhelmed, there's really only 2 templates we're following, one to start the show and then the other to fill it with content. When you've done a few, you can make a day's worth of these pretty easily. I use the intro to 120 minutes as my placeholder, as I'm still building some shows up, so you might see that repeated a few times. Let's start with the intro. We know in this example we want the show to start at 12 PM, so we set this as a fixed time. It's reading from a smart collection, so it's picking up the ident Hitlist UK collection, and I've told it to just pick a single random clip. Let's enter the name of the show in the custom title and ensure the guide mode is set to normal. We don't need to touch the filler here, as we want to roll straight into the content after this is finished. The channel already has a watermark set as default, so unless you want to replace this with a different one for your show, we can leave that blank too. Now to get the music playing. So underneath we make an entry with a dynamic start, as we don't know the exact time as the intro could be any length. We just want it to start straight after. And we pick our multi-collection of Hitlist UK 90s as we previously discussed. We're going to shuffle these in a flood, exactly the same as we did on our test server. It might be tempting to make a show with a set duration, but I'm happy to let Ersatz handle the timing, as it knows the next show is at 2 PM and we will build a playlist knowing this. We can leave the custom title blank, but we're going to set the guide mode to filler. This means it will inherit the name from the intro we set earlier, so we'll have a nice single block in the EPG when we load this into our media player. We're going to use filler here, so based on what we've already discussed, let's ignore the pre-roll and mid-roll and go straight to the post-roll. It'll only show the viable options we set in our filler presets here, so it's an easy choice. We repeat the same for tail and fallback, and we're finished. We've just built our first proper show. Now you just need to repeat this for your other shows, which can be a bit time consuming. I personally made a template where I added all the shows that aired at the same time each day, and then copied this into a new schedule for each day, and then filled in the unique items. In the playout options, I make that daily schedule the default, but in reality it will never get played, as I've assigned each schedule to a day of the week, although I personally just make a single one for the weekend and have it play on both Saturday and Sunday. If you want a special one for Christmas Day or other holidays, you can do that too, as it contains an entire calendar. You just have to make sure this is put on top of your schedule list. Guys, I think we did it. Even if you only partially completed your schedules, unless you make a mistake that causes a conflict, the system is going to happily play the things you do have in place until it's told to do something else. So if you have a 30-minute show that only has a pool of 20 songs, you'll get the same ones playing way more often than you probably want, but it just means adding more to those folders and waiting. Once the framework is in place, it's just a case of growing your library and, more importantly, actually watching it. And I do find I watch it. I have an iPad next to my computer monitor that I'll just have it playing on, and there's tons of new videos I've never seen amongst all the old classics. I love to see a show intro hit in, as I know it'll be something new, especially if it's something more rock orientated during the day, as that's less usual for me. It really does feel like I'm watching what I remember of the real MTV from the 90s, but without all the boring stuff I don't care to remember. This isn't the end of the series. I do intend to put together one last video with some other bits and pieces, but nothing you need to wait on to start putting yours together. If I see any good questions that I can answer, I'll include these in the video too. And with active development of Ersatz still, maybe there'll be some new features we can utilise one day. I'll be including a few things I'd like to see in future updates in that video too. So that's it for today. I wish you all the success, and please, if there's any issues or queries, please make a comment. I'll do my best to help where I can. Bye bye.